This is a shir on Likutei Sichos, volume 27, Chelek of Zayin, the Sicha of Acharei, the third Sicha. Over here in this Sicha, the Rebbe is going to address the fundamental issue of life preservation, even if it means not keeping the mitzvahs, all except for three cardinal mitzvahs that you give up your life for: idolatry, adultery, and murder. All the other mitzvahs, we say you protect your life, preserve your life, particularly about Shabbos. So we're going to be taking a deep dive into why Shabbos is so unique in this halacha. What does it contribute to our understanding? That violate Shabbos to save a life, how does that really contribute to our understanding of the dynamics of why life overrides Torah? But let us see it in the words of the Rebbe, paragraph 1. We talk about the concept of pikuach nefesh, which means danger of life. Gemara says in the tractate of Yuma, how do we know that pikuach nefesh, saving life, pushes away Shabbos, overrides Shabbos? In other words, very simply, somebody is ill, you get into the car and you drive him to the hospital to save his life, even though you're not allowed to drive a car in Shabbos. The Gemara brings several ways we learn it. And he says, in the end of the day, there's one pasuk, and it's in our parsha of Acharei, that seals the deal. It says, "You should keep my statutes and my laws," says God. That man shall do them, these laws, v'chai b'hem, and live with them, says the Gemara. V'chai b'hem, v'lo she'amut b'hem. Got to live with the Torah, not die with the Torah. There are very few instances, as we said, 3, where a person has to give up his life and die for the Torah. Usually, the mitzvahs are given to keep us alive, to give us a good life, a meaningful life, a life connected to Hashem. And if doing the mitzvah is going to mean we lose our life, except for the 3 extraordinary circumstances, life pushes away the Torah. And in this case, the Gemara says it pushes away Shabbos. So we want to understand, we know that it's not just about Shabbos. This piece of Talmud speaks about Shabbos. But this is a rule in the whole Torah, not just about Shabbos. Why would you hone in on Shabbos when really it's a universal rule about all Torah mitzvahs? That saving a life overrides Torah, except for the 3 instances where it doesn't. So why do we need a separate teaching in the Gemara that tells us, the Gemara asks, how do we know that saving a life overrides Shabbos? And he says this verse. Isn't it part of what we already know in a much larger scale, that all mitzvahs are pushed aside to save life? More than this. This law of ya'avor va'al yahareg, when a person is faced with being killed or violating a sin, tell him violate the sin and do not get killed, is brought in various places in Torah. And it's actually learned from the same verse that we just quoted, which teaches us that life overrides Shabbos. And that being, namely, the verse, v'chai b'hem, you have to live with the Torah, v'lo she'amut b'hem, not that you should die with the Torah. So from this, we understand that the fact that the Gemara brings this teaching specifically about Shabbos, it's obviously not a copy-paste of the way it is said about all mitzvahs, because if the Gemara says, how do we know that Shabbos is overridden by life? And he brings this verse. Obviously, there's something unique about Shabbos and this verse, but the question is, that verse tells you to live, tells you about all mitzvahs, not just Shabbos, but there must be something unique that we have to pick up on. Number 2, the pasuk that says to live with Torah, not to die with Torah, doesn't mention a word about Shabbos. So how are we bringing it as a proof for Shabbos when it doesn't say anything about Shabbos? It says, it says about generically all the mitzvahs. Yet we single it out for Shabbos using that pasuk, which is generic for all mitzvahs. Strange. Similarly, you have to understand the Rambam, when he brings this teaching, he teaches it to us twice. First, in the first book of Rambam, which is the laws of Yesodei HaTorah, the fundamental rules of Torah, the Rambam lays out his case for not giving up your life for, in other words, saving your life if you need to. As he says, if a non-Jew would force a Jew to transgress any of the mitzvahs, or he'll kill him, except for the 3 cardinal ones, idolatry, adultery, and murder, allow a Jew needs to allow himself. A Jew will violate the transgression and stay alive, as it says. This verse that we've quoted: man has to do the mitzvah and live. The Rambam says even more. The Rambam is quite harsh. There's a difference of opinion about this in the early reciters of halacha. The Rambam says if a person, let's give you an example, if somebody didn't want to eat, somebody, a non-Jew, was forcing a Jew to violate Shabbos, and he resisted. He said, "I'll kill you if you don't break the Shabbos," and he resisted, and he's killed. In the Rambam's eyes, this person is liable for, the Jew is liable for punishment. He would say he made a big sacrifice. There are other opinions says that he's allowed to sacrifice for other ones also. The Rambam says no. But so that's a general overarching law about Torah and life. If you're not obligated to give up your life for Torah, except for the three big ones. So you would figure that that rule is enough for the entire corpus of the book of the Rambam, all the halachas. It applies everywhere. Comes the Rambam, and in the laws of Shabbos, the Rambam repeats it, singles out this law about Shabbos. How does he say in the laws of Shabbos? He says, "Asur litma'ameya b'chilul Shabbat lecholesh yesh bo sakana." You're not allowed to tarry or delay for somebody who's ill, in life danger, because it says, "V'chai b'hem," a person has to do the mitzvahs and live, not to die. So 1 second. Why does the Rambam also teach this same teaching twice? Once generically about mitzvahs and once specifically about Shabbos. It seems that there's something unique with the teaching about Shabbos that bears repeating. Even though you've taught the law about all other mitzvahs, and Shabbos should be grandfathered in, should be included. There's something special both in the Gemara and in the Rambam where Shabbos is singled out again. So now let's try and understand what could it be. So, paragraph 2. It would seem that we could say that in the laws of Shabbos, the Rambam adds an interesting suffix. He says, this teaches us, because the Torah says you have to live with the mitzvahs, not die for the mitzvahs. This teaches us she'ein mishpatei haTorah nekama ba'olam, that the teachings of the Torah are not revenge in the world. It's not God getting back at us or something. He wants us to die and suffer. So the Torah mitzvahs are all about mercy, kindness, peace in the world. And if you're going to lose your equilibrium, lose your peace, and whatever it is, so don't transgress the mitzvah and stay alive. Because the Torah is all about life and peace. Now, the Rambam says this when he says the law about Shabbos. In the introduction of the Yosef Torah, in the book of the fundamentals of the Torah, about other mitzvahs, the Rambam doesn't bring it. So what we understand is that this aspect of learning that the laws of Torah are compassion and kindness in the world would seem to be most indicated in the laws of Shabbos. That's why he brings it there. As the Rambam himself continues about Shabbos, that those apikorsim, those scoffers that say that it's a violation of Shabbos to save a life on Shabbos, about them the Torah states, I have given them not good statutes and laws that they cannot live with. In other words, these people are missing the point. They are thinking that the mitzvahs and Torah are not to be lived with. They're not good. They got it wrong. Which we could say the explanation about this is the fact that, so what's the Rebbe is saying, that already in the book of the introduction of the Torah, the Rambam taught us that life takes precedence. In the laws of Shabbos, he repeats that law, but then he says, because anybody who delays is considered cruel, and in general, those that say that violating Shabbos to save a life is a violation of Shabbos that shouldn't be done, they miss the point. For them, they're learning that the mitzvahs are no good and they're not life. Why does the Rambam say that particularly only in the laws of Shabbos? Well, we could say because how do we look? Let's analyze. How do we look at this halacha which tells us that when life is in danger, you override, you do not keep the mitzvah. If somebody's, let's say, deathly ill and needs to eat something unkosher, or is dying of starvation, the only thing to eat is non-kosher, we say he has to eat. How do we look at that? Do we look that now that thing is not unkosher? Or do we look at it that saving life just pushes away that prohibition? Usually we would seem to be that there's a prohibition. It's not that the unkosher food becomes kosher. Or it's not that now the person doesn't have an instruction by God to eat only kosher. There's an instruction. The food is not kosher. In a good day, he is instructed not to eat it. Saving life pushes it away. Life is more important. It pushes away the prohibition. It says, Mr. Prohibition, just stay there and wait because I'm stronger than you. I'm arm wrestling you. Saving life forces the wrestling. Comes to Shabbos, perhaps what the Rambam is telling us, that when it comes to Shabbos and there's somebody who's sick, Shabbos is just like a weekday. The Shabbos goes away. The Shabbos becomes, it's not like the Shabbos is standing there and you're arm wrestling it down by getting into the ambulance of Shabbos. It's that the whole Shabbos moves aside and says, do whatever you got to do now. A different way of looking at it. So perhaps we can say there's two different ways of looking at the way saving life impacts your pushing away, doing what you have to usually do. Yeah.
I actually have a very, very, tiny story to that, which kind of might illustrate the point. In my grandmother and grandfather on my dad's side came from a place called Bolchov in today it's Ukraine. It used to be Poland in Galicia, and there was a Rabbi Levine. I remember I met Rabbi Levine, who was an old man already, at my grandmother's funeral when I was 8 years old or something. And Rabbi Levine, the Zivon Bachav, my father related a story about Rabbi Levine during the Depression. And remember, you're not talking about, in general, highly educated people. They had conventional wisdom of the day. Someone would come to Rabbi Levine, and of course he knew his community. And there were usually poor people. And there's, one guy was family of four, and they said, "Listen, we found a chicken, and is it kosher or not? So can we eat it Shabbat?" He told them it was kosher. He knew it wasn't, but he said it was kosher, not to trick them, but because he realized that if he didn't tell them that, they wouldn't eat. They would starve.
Interesting. That's an interesting halacha. Okay.
And
anecdotal. Yeah. Okay.
There wasn't any beans. They didn't know from beans in those days.
Right.
That's protein, but that's what you would do today. But back then, in the 1920s, 1930s.
Okay, I'm gonna go on. I hear what you're saying. If it's life and death, you eat a non-kosher chicken, right? I guess he decided it was life and death. So that's why the Rambam says again by Shabbos. The Rambam says "V'chai b'hem v'lo she'amud b'hem," that you have to live with the mitzvahs, not die. And he also adds, this teaches us that the laws of the Torah are not revenge or vengeful or anger in the world. They are mercy, kindness, and peace. To tell us that when it comes to violating the Torah for protecting a life on Shabbos, the prohibitions were never even said. It's as if, it's a life and death. The prohibition of Shabbos is not applicable to you. Not that it pushes away, it just never started because you're in a life and death. The Torah instructs Shabbos to those that can, not to those that are in life and death situations. And that's why the Rambam continues, it says, those apikusim, those heretics who say that this is a violation of Shabbos to save a life, even though you're breaking Shabbos, about this, we say that they want to say that the chukim, that the laws are no good. In other words, the fact that they violated Shabbos was no good. In other words, to use classic language of analytical language of the debaters of Torah, is it dechuya, is it pushed aside, or is it just taken off? Is the Shabbos, so, and he's saying that with all the other prohibitions of the Torah, saving a life comes and pushes it aside, because saving a life is more important. Comes to Shabbos, what the Rebbe is proposing is that the Rambam is teaching us that the Shabbos has been lifted in this situation. You don't have to fight it. It's lifted, it's like a week, they do whatever you got to do. And this would also help be understood, paragraph 3. We could say that this is also the reason for the differences in the language of the Rambam. In the Rambam's rules of foundations of the Torah, when we talk about all the mitzvahs, the Rambam says, as it says in the mitzvahs, as it says in the Torah, man shall do it and live with them. Then he repeats and says, to live in them, not that they should die in them. In the laws of Shabbos, he repeats it, but he doesn't repeat it fully. The explanation being that in all the mitzvahs, this is a special teaching from the Pasuk. We learn from the Pasuk a separate teaching that mitzvahs are not meant to be stronger, to push off the potential death of a Jew. On the contrary, saving the life pushes aside the mitzvahs. When it comes to Shabbos, however, it's not a separate law that tells you that life is more important than Shabbos. What he's telling you is that Shabbos, the laws of Shabbos, were made in such a way that if somebody's sick, the laws of Shabbos are not even applicable. The question, are they pushing it, or has Shabbos been lifted in the case of danger to life? Paragraph 4. According to this, we could say, this would also explain why Rashi in the Talmud explains that when we learn from the Torah of Acharei, you have to live in the mitzvahs, not die for them. He says, why is it? Why does the Torah say that you have to live with the mitzvahs, and it's not if it causes you death? Says Rashi explained, because the reason is because the nefesh shel Yisrael, the soul of the Jew, is so beloved before Hashem more than his mitzvahs. And Hashem says, you know what? Hashem has two things, in other words. He has the people he's created, his people, and he has his commandments. His people are so dear to him that he says, you know what, guys, if my instructions are going to interfere with my people staying alive, stay alive. Forget about the instruction. When we talk about Shabbos, however, and we know that Shabbos is pushed aside even if it's a doubt. We're not sure whether we have to break the Shabbos, but maybe it's that serious. We do it even if there's a doubt. Rashi says, what's the reason? There Rashi uses for language. He says that the person should do the mitzvahs to live them. He has to do mitzvahs in a way that he'll definitely live, not in a way that he comes to possible death. From this we understand that we're even instructed to violate the Shabbos if there's a possible danger to life. In other words, by all the other mitzvahs, you say, let the mitzvah be canceled, so the person should stay alive. About Shabbos, we say that the instruction about doing Shabbos is doing it in a way where he can stay alive, not in a way that he'll die. This is further bolstering what the Rebbe is trying to say, that perhaps what's being hinted at here by saying this same teaching twice, once by all mitzvahs and once by Shabbos, is that they're actually, sounds the same, but it's not the same. By all the mitzvahs, we're saying life is more important than the mitzvah. So to save a life, again, like I say, the arm wrestle, you'll wrestle down the mitzvah. With Shabbos, we say the instruction on Shabbos is to do Shabbos in a way that you stay alive. And so if there's a possibility that the Shabbos will bring you not to stay alive, the Shabbos moves aside. Don't have to arm wrestle him. Just moves aside, you do what you got to do. So it's the same verse, but different nuance. It says that in paragraph 5, it's difficult to say that. It's not enough yet. We have to flesh it out. Why? Because, well, first of all, in a footnote that points out that the Rambam himself says that Shabbos is pushed aside when there's danger of death. We're just trying to say that Shabbos isn't pushed aside. It's just not even there in the first place when there's life danger. The Rambam does say it's pushed aside. So difficult to say what we tried to say. But then there's something else. The Rambam in the laws of Shabbos says this teaches us, when it says that you have to live with the Torah, this teaches us that the laws of Torah are not cruel or they're not vengeful. You see, the Rambam is talking about all mitzvahs, not just Shabbos. So if he's saying that all mitzvahs have to be done in a way of life, in a way of peace, why is he emphasizing that only in the laws of Shabbos? Why doesn't he say it when he gave the general rule at the beginning of his book, his 14 books of Rambam, in the first book called the Yosef Torah, the fundamentals of Torah? Why doesn't he say that there? That you have to do mitzvahs in a way that you live. So again, you see that Rambam has, it's a generic instruction, but it's also very oriented to Shabbos. Why? So that's why. So let's explain why. So paragraph 6 will start giving us the thread to unravel what's different about Shabbos and life and all other mitzvahs in life. In other words, the bottom line will remain: when life will be lost by keeping a mitzvah, you preserve your life, you don't keep the mitzvah. When Shabbos faces that challenge, also you break the Shabbos, you save the person. Same law, but different meaning. How so? Paragraph 6. We'll understand by first understanding that where does the Rambam write this law that you have to live with the mitzvahs and not die for them? In the laws of Shabbos, he brings in about one particular detail. You know what detail? It says, Asur lihitma'ameya b'chilul Shabbat. You're not allowed to delay violating the Shabbos for a sick person who's in danger. I mean, the Gemara says that this teaching tells us that saving a life pushes away Shabbos. It doesn't just talk about not delaying. Why does the Rambam tie this teaching to not delaying helping a sick person on Shabbos when it requires violation? So the commentaries say that the source of this law, not to delay, is actually from another piece of Talmud, which says that Hazor is somebody who's enthusiastic and moves quickly with alacrity to violate Shabbos for somebody in danger is praiseworthy. Somebody who asks, somebody who waits and asks is considered shofech damim, is considered a blood, somebody who's murderous. When there's an emergency, somebody starts saying, Shabbos, can I? Hello. If there's an emergency and you know there's danger, just do.
Remind me of the Shabbos we had in London. Remember?
Yeah.
That's the same emergency.
True. However,
But what is the definition of emergency?
you know what? If you're not sure, break the Shabbos. If you're sure it's not, then you're sure it's not. But if you're not sure, that's the definition of a suffix pikuach nefesh. And if it's a suffix pikuach nefesh, even a doubtful pikuach nefesh, you break the Shabbos. So here, the Rambam, however, changes from the language of Gemara, and he places the basis that you're not allowed to delay into the pasuk that b'chai b'hem you have to live with the mitzvahs. Why? Paragraph 7. So you can say that with this, the Rambam is telling us, how does pikuach nefesh, saving life, push away Shabbos? What's the dynamic of it? Because let's look again at the language. You asked very good just now. What happens if you don't know? So the language of the Rambam is hanishal, somebody who's asked. Areza meguna is shameful. Vashoel areza shofech damim. Somebody who asks is murderous. I think just to comment that if somebody's in a community and he's being asked, this means he hasn't been very clear with those around him in time that saving life is more important than Shabbos. If you're coming to ask, it means you haven't. The rule has to be clear. You shouldn't even need to be asked. If there's a possible danger, do what you got to do. At any rate, then it says Hazari Zarem is Shubach. Somebody who has alacrity is praiseworthy. What that all points out is that there's a big, big mitzvah to save lives, even more important than Shabbos. The way that Rambam says it, Asur litmamea b'chilul Shabbat l'choleh. He says it's forbidden to delay violating Shabbos for a sick person. This kind of tells us something else. It tells us that Shabbos itself, the laws of Shabbos themselves require breaking the Shabbos to save the person. We're not pushing away the Shabbos. The Shabbos itself says, I want you to keep me. You know how you keep me in this case? By breaking me and saving the person. That's where the Rambam brings the words, the teaching. That you have to keep the mitzvahs in a way that you live in them, not that you die with them. Because there's other teachings that tell us that we have to break the Shabbos, which sheds some more light. What are the other teaching? There's a verse that says in Parshat Ki Tisa v'shamru v'nei Yisrael Shabbat. Bnei Yisrael kept the Shabbos. What does our sages tell us? Amra Torah chalel alav Shabbat achat. Torah says violate one Shabbos to save the life of this person. Kidei sheyishmor Shabbatot harbeh. So the person will come to keep many Shabbatot. If there's a concept, if you ask Shabbos, should we let this person die or break the Shabbos to save him? What will the Shabbos tell you? Mathematically, this guy's going to keep a lot more Shabbos. Break me right now because it's going to be better for me. What's the difference between the two ways of learning? One way of learning is that you're saying that life overrides Shabbos. The other way of learning is that the Torah, that Shabbos itself says it's for my honor that you're breaking it because he's going to be able to keep more Shabbos. If he dies, he can't keep any more Shabbos. What's the difference between both ways of learning? First of all, the teaching where we say violate this Shabbos, so you should keep many Shabbos, this wouldn't apply to other mitzvahs, right? And also, when we say violate the Shabbos, so you should keep other Shabbos, that means that you're actually, the purpose of violating the Shabbos is for the Shabbos itself. So you're still talking about keeping the mitzvah. You're not saying push aside the mitzvah. You say keep the mitzvah, but in this case, the mitzvah itself will be best served by breaking it and keeping him alive, because then he'll be able to keep many other Shabbos. Whereas when we say the teaching that saving a life pushes away a mitzvah, that's saying that indeed the mitzvah won't be done. The mitzvah is saying, you're attacking me, but I know why, because life is more important. In the Shabbos case, the Shabbos is saying, let me go. You violate me because it's better for me. And therefore, there's also a difference in the context of what it means here to violate the Shabbos, to desecrate the Shabbos. If you say from the perspective of violate one Shabbos, so he should keep many Shabbos. And as the Acharei, the Pirush on the Torah says, this teaches us that actually it's not called violation, it's called Shmira Shabbos. Can you imagine? He says that violating the Shabbos, desecrating the Shabbos to save a life, is actually called keeping the Shabbos. Why? Because this guy will keep many other Shabbos. So don't look at what's happening right now. Look at the long game. Long game is this person will live. He's going to keep on. He's going to keep on. What you call? You may ask.
Rabbi, does that mean that the rules for it's not that you're violating the Shabbat, it's that the rules for you on this particular Shabbat have changed for you because of the situation.
The rule of the Shabbos is to break it so that you can allow the person to keep many more Shabbos. Of course, in the footnote he asks, what happens if the person is not going to live the whole Shabbos? He's not going to keep another Shabbos. Doesn't matter. Every minute he can still be keeping it. Every minute he can still be doing mitzvahs. But it's not a violation. It's just a different calculation. Look at what's going to happen if you. Usually we can't do that. A person can't say, let me, God forbid, bow to an idol, because look how many mitzvahs I'll do afterwards. No, there are three mitzvahs, there are three times when Hashem says, no way. But in this case, Hashem says yes. And in the case of Shabbos, it's in order to generate more Shabbos keeping of this person. So the act on this Shabbos, which seems to be an act of violating Shabbos, Chilul Shabbos, it is an act of violation of Shabbos, but it's really a violation which leads to many more Shabbos. However, when we talk about the overarching rule, v'chai behem, that you have to live in the mitzvahs and not die, there we're talking about mitzvahs in general. And we're saying we're not talking about the act of violation. We're talking about the fulfillment of the mitzvah. We're saying that when you look at the detail of fulfilling the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos, it has to be done in a way where you can stay alive. So therefore, if there's a danger of life will override it. In other words, when you violate the Shabbos, when there's danger, not just is it not a violation, but actually violating the Shabbos is called Shmirat Shabbat. Somebody asks, are you Shomer Shabbat? I keep Shabbos. What about that time you drove an ambulance? That's Shmirat Shabbat. The Shabbos told me to go and keep him holy and make sure that guy who I'm saving can keep more Shabbos. It's not a violation. It's part of. Why is it so unique by Shabbos like that? So listen to this. Why Shabbos is so unique in the relationship between its violation and yet that's a fulfillment of the Shabbos. Paragraph 8. Explanations like this. About Shabbos, it says something unique. Et Shabtotai tishmoru, keep my Shabbos, ki oti beini u'benechem ledoretechem. For it is a sign between me and you for all generations, ladat, to know, ki ani Hashem ekadishchem, I am Hashem who makes you holy. Rashi explains this on the Torah. Ot gedulahi beineinu, this is a sign of greatness between us. Shebacharti bachem, I have chosen you. V'anchili lachem et yom enuchati lemenucha, I have given you my day of rest to be your day of rest. So what is the content? What is the deeper meaning of Shabbos? A bond, sign of Hashem's closeness, Hashem's relationship with his people. So when a Jew is in a position where his life is in danger, means that the whole basis of Shabbos is in danger. He may not live. Right? So when you violate the Shabbos to save his life, you're not just doing the mitzvah of saving a life, you're also making sure that that person can be there and be that, interact with the Shabbos, which is the sign. If Hashem is making a sign from his side, but the guy who's making the sign is not there, the point of the Shabbos is gone. So in other words, the sign becomes not just because you saved another Jew. And through him now there becomes the Hashem connects him with the sign of Shabbos. But it's not just that that by him being alive, there's somebody with whom Hashem makes a sign. The actual act of keeping him alive actually indicates that Hashem loves him. When you save a Jew on Shabbos by violating Shabbos, so through the very violation, what are you pointing out? That Hashem loves this person, and that Hashem therefore makes a sign, because he loves him, he gives him the sign of Shabbos that creates a bond between Hashem and the Jewish people. And that's why Shabbos says, it strengthens me when you strengthen the partner with whom Hashem has bestowed me upon. What shall we say? Try and think if we can think of an analogy for this. So they were saying the Shabbos is a sign. Hashem says, I want to give for my special people my special day. Imagine Hashem standing there to give the day and there's nobody there to take it. And there's nobody there to take it because you say, sorry, there's a can't turn on the engine to take the guy to the hospital because, what do you mean? Standing here, Hashem's standing here. The Shabbos is here saying, I need to go to that guy. And if that guy won't be there, then me, the Shabbos, is lacking. Hashem, I'm the connect between Hashem and the Jew, but I need the Jew to be there. So yes, get into that car and take him to the hospital, because if he's gone, the Shabbos says I'm diminished. And by the fact that I'm telling you that Hashem wants you to do that, that's exactly what the Shabbos is supposed to emphasize, that there's a special bond between Hashem and his people. So the violation of the Shabbos is actually, it's strengthening the concept of the Shabbos. It's strengthening the ot, the sign that the Shabbos makes. These people are special to Hashem. And we learn this from the fact that it says in the Pasuk Darash. So Hashem says, do the mitzvahs and live in them, but don't die in them. That's talking about mitzvahs in general. Because yes, this concept is by all mitzvahs. Not just, what is the reason that life, danger in life pushes aside mitzvahs? The way the chinuch, one of the foremost expounders of the law of the reasons of the Torah, I'll paraphrase his language. Lefisha sibata siyata mitzvahu ha'adam. Because the purpose of doing the mitzvah is all about the person. Hashem gives the instruction so that the instructed person should do the mitzvah. V'kiyum hasiba o kiyum hakol. Hashem's giving you the mitzvah for what? He's giving you the mitzvah for the person. Now, if the mitzvah fulfillment is going to kill the person, the mitzvah, who's more important here? Are the people given for the mitzvahs, or the mitzvahs given to the people? Let me say, for example, say somebody gives a rule that the kids are not allowed to go to the closet where the cakes are. Now, can you imagine? All of a sudden, there's a problem. Nobody can get in and out of the house. The kids are all alone. And 3 days they're starving, but they don't want to go to that closet. They told me they should go to the closet. Don't go to the closet. The whole reason the parents told them not to go to the closet is because it's not healthy for them. Sugar, whatever. They're keeping it to them for another time. That locked closet is for them, not supposed to be against them. Can you imagine if they don't do it and they die of starvation because they didn't want to? The reason I wanted the closet was for you. So if you're in danger, of course, go and take what's there in the closet. The mitzvahs are for the person. If the mitzvah is now going to take the life of the person, so it defeated its purpose. Look at the central agenda. The central agenda, Hashem loves his people. So that's with all mitzvahs. However, by all mitzvahs, so really, what are mitzvahs about? Mitzvahs are about the fact that Hashem chose us. Why does he give us so many restrictions and commandments? Because he chose us to be a special people, because he loves us, not because he wants to make us trouble. So it's by all mitzvahs. But by Shabbos, there's something special. We know that the Shabbos is called a sign. By all other mitzvahs, we know that that's the rationale. We can understand a little deeper that a mitzvah is for us. It's the commandment, really is for us. But about Shabbos, it says it openly in the Torah. Oti beini u'beinechem. The Torah is a sign between me and you. The Torah is a sign that you are my people. That's why I give you the special day. So that's why by Shabbos, we're learning in a separate way that pikuach nefesh, danger of life, pushes aside the Shabbos. And that's why the Rambam, paragraph 9, that's why the Rambam says about this particular teaching about Shabbos, because this is so central to Shabbos that the mitzvahs are for the Jew. Therefore, Shabbos is for the Jew. Therefore, the Shabbos itself says, hey, if the Jew's in danger, the way I want you to respect me is by keeping him alive. That's why the Rambam says you can't delay it. Because you have to, if you're going to delay if you're going to delay violating the Shabbos when somebody's in danger, you're violating the Shabbos already. The way you keep the Shabbos is by going and saving him. And from there, the Rambam says this is the way it is with all mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are not vengeance. The mitzvahs are all about the good to that person, peace, and therefore part of the way you keep the mitzvah is by violating it if it's going to take away life. So by applying it now to all the laws of the Torah, which is telling us that it's not that when there's a danger, the mitzvahs were as if disappeared. You're not obligated. What we're saying is that the laws of the Torah, they don't disappear. They stand there screaming, save the guy's life. So, eat pig. He's about to die. He needs to eat something. The only thing there is pig. The Torah says don't eat it. But that same mitzvah standing there and saying eat it. Not that the mitzvah disappears. I won't look. I won't look. Do what you got to do. I won't look. No. The mitzvah is standing there saying the mitzvahs are all about life. Usually, the way Hashem gives life and kindness and compassion to the world is by us not eating things that's not kosher. Right now, though, that mitzvah itself is all about keeping this person alive. It's telling you right now, eat that. It's most emphasized by Shabbos, because Shabbos is a sign, and by its very definition, it's called a sign of Hashem's love to the Jew. So, as being a sign, if it's putting his life in danger, it's shooting itself in the leg. It's cutting off the branch it's sitting on. He has to. Shabbos wants you to be strengthened because he's the sign of Hashem's love to you. That means you're the main agenda, right? And that's the way it is with all mitzvahs, really. But with Shabbos, it's more open. That's why the Rambam says it by Shabbos. Once he's taught us this concept on Shabbos, that the Shabbos itself, its fulfillment is through keeping the person alive. He says, really, all the mitzvahs are like that. Their agenda is the Jew. So if they're keeping them, puts the Jew in danger, the mitzvah itself is saying, the way my compassion works, the way Hashem's compassion works, the mitzvahs are meant to be lived. So please, violate me and keep yourself alive. According to this, we'll also be able to understand what the commentaries ask. I mean, the Torah says that a person, the mitzvahs shall be done by a person and he should live. What does that tell you? That when a person is in danger, he should violate. But the question is, what about, okay, we understand that if a person himself is in danger, okay, there's nothing to eat, and about to die, we tell him, go and eat this and this. Okay, if a person feels in danger on Shabbos, get himself into a taxi and or turn on his car and go to the. But how do we know that somebody else is allowed to violate his Shabbos to save another guy? The pasuk says the mitzvahs that should be done to live with them, maybe only the person himself can violate in order to save his life. Right? So when we say, but now we'll understand, if what we're saying is that by saving the Jew, yeah, it doesn't matter who's doing it. Anybody who's participating, the person himself or somebody else, what they're doing is still the same function for the Shabbos. The Shabbos is screaming, they're saying this Jew is going to die. I'm here to be a sign between him and Hashem, but he's going to die. So I'm screaming, me Shabbos is screaming, go and drive, take him to hospital. So whoever does it, doesn't matter who does it, whoever does it, the actual Shabbos is being enhanced. The ois, the sign of Hashem between Hashem and the people is being enhanced. So it's a beautiful, beautiful look, deep dive at the mechanics of how this works. How critical it is that in the end, the most important part of Hashem's agenda is his people. The mitzvahs are instructions to the people in a way of compassion that they should live. Except when those three mitzvahs that Hashem has told us, the murder, adultery, and idolatry, where it's such a total cutoff from Hashem that you can't, the relationship cannot be maintained if those are violated. So give up your life, and in that way, you show your total dedication to Hashem. But in all the other ones, the way the mitzvahs themselves are saying, the way to fulfill me is by right now not fulfilling me. Paragraph 10. Now this, the Rebbe, when the Rebbe said this Sikha was Shabbos before Pesach. Based on the calendar, the portion of Acharei can be also Shabbos before Pesach, which is Shabbat HaGadol. Why is Shabbat HaGadol called the Big Shabbos? So the reason it's called the Big Shabbos is because there was a big miracle. What was a big miracle? let's remember the last plague. Let's go back to this, what happened in the last few days of the Jewish people in Egypt. On the 10th day of the month, right? They went out on the 15th day of the month. So they brought the carbon paste of the Paschal offering the 14th day of the month. 4 days before, on the 10th day of the month, they were instructed to take a sheep, tie it to the bedpost. Keep it there for 4 days. The Egyptians asked, what's this about? The Jews said, well, Hashem said he's going to kill all the firstborns, but before that, we have to sacrifice a lamb and put the blood. And the firstborns hear this. They say the Jews have a good track record. 9 times Moshe has warned about a plague, and it all came true. There's no reason to think this one is not going to come true. And we're firstborns. We stand to suffer. They went to Paro and they said, hello, let's negotiate. Let's let the Jews go. He says, no way. They said, no way, civil war. They started doing battle. This was a great, great miracle when there's inner civil war, when your enemies are fighting internally. That's the best thing. Doesn't require your energy. They're taking both of them are your enemies, and they're taking care of reducing each other's power. So that great miracle took place on Shabbos before Pesach. That's why it's called Shabbos Haggadah. In other words, what was the day that they took this lamb, they prepared it? It was on Shabbos. 4 days. They left Egypt. The 15th day of Nisan was Thursday. That means the 10th day of Nisan was Shabbos. So what led to the civil war? The fact that they said that the Egyptians, the firstborn Egyptians we're bringing this sacrifice because the Egyptian firstborns are about to be killed. What that achieved is not just that the Jews were terrified to say it. I mean, they should have been terrified. The lamb was the idol of the Egyptians. So they had to totally get out of the mindset of being victims, being slaves, and say, we're gonna slaughter this lamb, which is your idol. You would expect that the Egyptians would let out their fury on the Jews, but it didn't happen. They didn't touch them. Not just that, who did they let out their anger on? Fellow Egyptians. The firstborns went to fight so that the Jews should be redeemed. They killed many of them. They killed their fathers even. And this tells, why is this called Shabbat Haggadah, the big Shabbos? Because what did we say Shabbos is? What is Shabbos? Shabbos is a sign that Hashem chooses the Jewish people. This that happened, this miracle that happened, a huge miracle that not just were the Jews not attacked for having the chutzpah to talk about slaughtering the Egyptian deity, but the Egyptians themselves started fighting against their leadership. That's a big Shabbos. Because what is Shabbos? Shabbos is a sign about how Hashem loves the Jews. That kind of miracle is an upgrade in showing the way Hashem loves the Jews. The other plagues were plagues. This plague it's incredible. The Jews said something that should have earned them the anger of the Egyptians on them. Not just were they not touched, the Egyptians started a civil war with each other. So this tells you about this builds up the Shabbos, because the Shabbos is all about the sign of greatness and love between Hashem and the Jews. So now we understand a little bit more of the dynamics, how it works. We need to, may Hashem give us the blessing to be able to keep as many Shabbos as possible. And says Mashiach will come. We all keep at least one Shabbos.